It's really been a lot of cycles of the same energies over and over, and that's what I'm trying to emphasize today. So if you haven't heard, who here has not heard of David Grush yet? Okay, very, very few people. I feel like just because I know there are always people who haven't heard yet, it's helpful to be aware that this is really exciting that we have relatively highly placed insiders now who have been able to interview a lot of other deeper insiders who are connected to examples like UFO back engineering projects or understanding the nature of some of the ETs and what's been going on. This information doesn't leak out very easy from the government, but now we have Congress getting more involved. We have some of the biggest names in the media getting involved. Joe Rogan, obviously, Tucker Carlson. It was incredible how many people watched that interview that they just did. And this is just shocking that we're in this situation where the most listened to people are digging into some of this information very heavily. So it's a huge cultural shift away from the stigma. That's the key thing that we're able to leverage now. And so there was a June 2021 Pew Research Center survey where they asked, what is the percentage of adults, or they asked the adults, would you say UFOs reported by people in the Earth military are blank evidence of intelligent life outside Earth? Probably evidence of intelligent life, or definitely evidence. So the probably and the definitely beliefs that this is evidence of intelligent life outside the Earth is over 50% as of 2021. So this is a huge shift in the cultural consciousness. I know when I grew up, it was like you couldn't really talk about anything without sounding loony, but we've gotten past that now. And I personally was commissioning surveys starting from 2017 through 2022, just to get straight to the heart of this, go one level deeper. And I asked people in the surveys, do you believe extraterrestrials are currently interacting with humanity? So it's not just UFOs or ETs, but are the ETs actually interacting with us? And in 2017, I got 66% saying no, or this is ridiculous. And in 2022, I finally got less than 50% saying no, or this is ridiculous. And the shift started accelerating considerably starting in 2021, 2022 timeframe. So it seems like there's some kind of mass mind shift that's been happening that allows us to now freely engage people on these subjects. And so with much less stigma now, we can start asking people and talking about openly, what are the true limits of our technology? How much closer are we to Star Trek like technology now? And also, where did we come from? Where did they come from? What are the origins and influences on our genetics? Our genetics is a huge question when you start getting into this study. And of course, our relationships between people and higher intelligences. Many people are, putting this in the frame of, is this demonic or angelic? People immediately want to know, are these passive observers or are they active players in our Earth situation? People want to know, should we see these as experimenters? Are we rats in a maze? Are these classroom teachers? Are these trade partners? Are these the slave farmers? These are all the different ways people are looking at this subject. And to some degree, you could look at all of it as true. It's just a matter of now we can finally have these discussions and engage with it like adults. So the merging of religious views and scientific views has not been very easy, but it is being forced on us gradually because all these subjects end up looking like religious things to people. I will recommend David Wilcock's books in the regard of helping people wake up to some of the scientific work that's been done, bridging the gap between spirituality and strong evidence-based approaches to understanding our reality. So this is a very polarizing subject right now, with the legitimacy of government whistleblowers constantly under question, the legitimacy of unverifiable sources and experiencer sources even more under question by the mainstream. And of course, legitimacy of intuitive information, such as the law of one, is still looked at as very non-credible by many people. But all these things are shifting now. And of course, even physical evidence can be questioned. And really what it comes down to is a question of authority. And so people will always try to cut down the authority of any source of information. So it's really a information warfare environment we're in right now, with different factions trying to cut down the authority of certain subjects and prop up what they want to see as the authority. And there's no clear way to evaluate all these without doing a lot of research, without doing your own homework. You can't really trust any quote unquote authority until you feel like you've evaluated enough of the voices out there. So there's a lot of people who are still just hung up on the idea that there's cover-ups at all. It's just there's so much fear around the idea that there's been government suppression, which it has to have occurred. If hardly any of these things are true, there has to have been really possibly sinister sorts of suppression to keep people who were very connected from being able to speak out. But channel material is what I'm going to go into mostly today, and people will often point out that channel material is highly inconsistent. It's hard to know which sources can be trusted. You can't really verify it. A lot of it's looks like it's nothing new because it's been talked about for eons if you go back into the esoteric literature. And of course, one of the biggest issues people have is not knowing if it's been influenced by negative entities or mixed quality sources when people are doing their channeling. But the benefits of channel material, and Ra talks about this quite a lot, channeling will offer a free will protection to the people involved in the channeling process. And they're able to sustain the contact for a longer period of time than if it was something like an ET showing up to you and trying to convey it to you. You might even have the government coming in and trying to stop that kind of thing. And a lot of the negative reactions that people could get from actually interacting with an ET face to face, you don't get that when it's coming through just a person's voice. And of course, if you're being contacted by a being, then there's a potential for the development of a Christ complex. A big ego can form. And this is apparently what happened with some 1950s contacts. But I think this is just much, much less for some people. I think Corey Good is in this category, by the way, that he doesn't seem to have that kind of an ego around these kinds of things like other people do. And you could say James Gilliland is in that category too. I respect him a lot as a contactee. And so I'm going to talk about the raw contact. So this was 106 channeling sessions from 1981 to 1984, done by Don Elkins as the questioner. He was a physics professor who also was into paranormal research, and he worked with channeling groups. Carl Ruckert was one of the later additions to the group. She was kind of hesitant to get involved in channeling till later on when Don Elkins needed her, and she was really good at it, it turned out. Jim McCarty joined in 1980. He was kind of a fan of the two, and he provided a lot of energy and love to the group to support them, what they were doing. And he managed the tape recorders, basically. He did the transcriptions, and the original audio recordings are still available. They turned the tape recordings into a digital format, and you can find those on the internet. It's very eerie to listen to the original audio recordings. But this was very strict channeling protocols that were done to ensure the highest quality possible contact. And Carla would do a very specific kind of attunement before the channeling and a challenge process right before the channeling to ensure that what she felt was the love of Jesus was connected to this source that she was allowing to come in. And it felt like to her that she was going asleep. She went into a trance state. Not everyone who channels is doing a trance channeling, but she essentially was leaving her body with no memory of what she was doing. And interestingly, she said that I talked to somebody who just a few months ago who apparently worked with Carl Ruckert for a few years, and said that when I asked her, Carl Ruckert believed that she was being visited by Jesus as a child several times in the physical. And you can make of that what you will, but that put into Carla's mind this sense of love that she then was always familiar with. And I think this is the most comprehensive and coherent channel material I've ever come across. And it's only in a Q&A format to preserve the free will of the team that was doing the channeling. It's not like they're giving a sermon and deciding what they want to share. It was Don Elkins asking questions, and that was allowing them to answer based on the free will principles of what they can say in the invitation that they've been given to share on things. And you check out alloresearch.org or log1.info if you want to read this on the internet. You can get the books. And this is the team. You see here Don Elkins in the middle, Carl Ruckert on the left, Jim McCarty on the right. And this was what it looked like when they were going into channeling. They had 3 tape recorders for redundancy because they'd always fail. And they had a Bible behind her head that was, Ross specifically asked this would bring Carla comfort, that they have the Bible open to John chapter 1 and a chalice of water that she would drink afterward, and an incense and candle. And here's the team at work. Jim would sit in the corner meditating. Carla would get a back massage. Don would sit in a chair just having a conversation with this ET being. So I've got a few disclaimers, not that this matters that much, but these are just my perspectives, and you can feel free to ignore anything that seems to contradict what you believe. I could be wrong. And if you want a more complete overview of some of these subjects, you could visit essentialworks.tv/law of one, and I have other presentations on there where I go into a lot of subjects. A lot of people just have trouble reading the books and they prefer my presentations, and that's kind of why I'm doing this. And I also want to point out that many details could be intentionally left unclear by Ra, and they say nothing about a future solar event, not in any clear terms. They say nothing about some specific period of open contact with ETs in the future. It's left to us to speculate, but I believe that they intentionally don't want to infringe on our free will by giving us too many details. But they said, when Don Elkins was very curious, like how many of the other channeling groups are actually doing high quality channeling. So Don Elkins asked Ra in session 26, what percentage of UFO channeling groups were heavily polluted by the negative groups, the negative Orion information? And if any of these groups were able to remain totally positive. And Ra said, to give you this information would be to infringe upon the free will or confusion of some living. And so then they gave a tip for evaluating information without telling us specifically what is true or not. They said, we ask you to consider the relative effect of philosophy and your so-called specific information. It is not the specificity of the information which attracts negative influences. It is the importance placed upon it. It's the importance placed upon specific information that ends up leading to the negative influences on the channel. This is why we iterate quite often when asked for specific information that it pales to insignificance, just as the grass withers and dies, while the love and light of the one infinite creator redounds to the very infinite realms of creation forever and ever, creating and creating itself in perpetuity. Why then be concerned with the grass that blooms, withers, and dies in its season, only to grow once again due to the love and light of the infinite creator? So I thought this is a very important slide to start on here with getting into the quotes from the material. And I will get into a lot of specifics today about the history of the Earth, but my goal here is to make this be about giving you a sense of the philosophy of why things are the way they are on Earth right now. And so just for the few who don't know this yet, I'll give a brief summary of what they describe as the 7 densities of consciousness. And this is because I'll be referencing the densities quite a bit today. The first density of consciousness is essentially the base elements that come out of chaos: water, fire, earth, and air, formed from chaos. These are undirected and random energies that start to coalesce into a density of consciousness, which has a manifest form. And then the second density, after eons of being a rock, a consciousness might turn into a plant or animal. And then after eons of time of growth through souls as plants and animals, beings can become intelligent, self-aware beings. And this is where we're at right now in this third density. It's also called the density of the choice, where we're at a very critical juncture in the evolution of our soul, where we're choosing between service to self and service to others. Love of self, love of others is our preference for how we want to evolve in this universe. Really, is do we want to be with the positive guys who see all as one, or we do want to be with the negative guys who reinforce and emphasize separation from one another and play that game? And so once you get into the fourth density, then you're in one of the other categories because you've made up your mind about what this is that we're doing. So that's governed by the laws of love or understanding, and it can be love of self or love of others. Whether or not you've chosen either path is how that density is governed to be of assistance to others in the positive path. And then the fifth density is governed by the laws of light or wisdom, and eventually become able to manifest things with your mind in that density. And then the sixth density is where Ra is coming from, or channeling from, also where the higher self is coming from. These are beings vibrating with the law of one, the realization of oneness. And negative beings do not withstand that, and they end up flipping polarities and becoming, in order to grow in light further, they have to flip and become appreciative of all the other beings that are one with them. And then the law of foreverness is the seventh density, when all of time becomes seen as one moment again. This is also called the totality of your being when you get to that point, and all of your prior incarnations are seen as one thing. And then the eighth density is the beginning of the next universe, the beginning of the next octave. We're not really the same entity anymore. And that's even mysterious to Ra, what occurs at this end of our universe. But they say that there's actually evidence of beings coming from across the barrier from the next universe into this one, which is why it's partly such a mystery. So in the early days of our galactic evolution, there was a slower rate of growth significantly. And But there was an experiment made that then accelerated the growth. But prior to what they call the galaxy's great experiment, or just the great experiment, a mind, body, spirit, which is kind of what they refer to as a person, but before there was the mind, body, spirit complex, which is the complex of energies we are now, there was the mind, body, spirit, which was much simpler and not separated by the complex of energies, which we call our ego. But the mind, body, spirits of that time were capable of controlling the pressure of the blood in the vein, the beating of the heart, the intensity of pain that they could experience, and all the functions that we now understand to be involuntary or unconscious, because there was no veil between the conscious and the unconscious mind. So the Logos, which is the mind of the galaxy, first devised the tool of separating the unconscious from the conscious during what we call the physical incarnation. And another way of looking at this, Ross said, consider the tendency of those who are divinely happy to have little urge to alter or better their condition. There is the possibility of love of other selves and service to other selves, but there is the overwhelming awareness of the creator in the self. The connection with the creator is that of the umbilical cord. The security is total. Therefore, no love is terribly important. No pain is terribly frightening. No effort, therefore, is made to serve for love or to benefit from fear. And in such a procession of densities, you find an extraordinarily long third density, they said. The willpower isn't developed in that state. So this is why we have polarity, is because our willpower can't be developed to the degree that we need to evolve more rapidly without seeing these contrasts of positive and negative. They say the purpose of polarity is to develop the potential to do work. And the saga of polarity, its consequences and limits, were unimagined until experienced through the veiling between the conscious and unconscious mind. And that's why they call it a great experiment. We don't know where this is all going, or at least they didn't know when they started exploring this potential for, I believe it was a genetic experimentation happening with entities to sort of allow there to be this separation between the conscious and the unconscious, with a low level of communication happening between the two. Although there are forms of communication, that's why they call it the veil. You can still break through the veil in your mind and receive incredible information from the deeper aspects of yourself. But they said that it is correct that the Logos designed its experiment to attempt to achieve the greatest possible opportunities for polarization and third density. So warfare, they said, was an interesting result, which is apparently concomitant with the tool-making ability. So the choice of the Logos to use the life form with the grasping thumb is the decision to which this type of warfare may be traced. It's literally because we have the ability to easily manipulate objects that we then explored the concept of warfare through having this polarity, this potential to have our consciousness veiled from the awareness of our oneness with others. So the desire to know that which was unknown, on the other hand, the desire to know that which is unknown drew these beings to dreaming, which dreaming is a way of communicating down with the unconscious mind. Dreaming and the gradual opening to all the balancing mechanisms leading to adepthood, and communication with teach learners who could pierce this veil. So there's a much stronger willpower, a desire to know that which is unknown in this kind of a body where we have a limited access to infinite intelligence through our minds. So I'm going to get started now talking about what they call the local confederation, which is the positive groups, positive ETs that are helping us, which Ra associated with. Ra said they are one of the members of the Confederation of Planets in the service of the infinite creator. There are approximately 53 civilizations in this confederation. And they said there are many confederations, but this particular confederation that they're a part of works with the planetary spheres of 7 of your star systems, the local star area, and is responsible for the callings of the densities of those star systems. I'll get into the nature of the callings in a little bit too, because people will put out a call, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, but it's kind of like prayer. When you're putting out a call to the universe has beings who assist in that response process, be they of the light or of the dark. We will be assisted with the callings that we're putting out. The Confederation is composed of many of those in other densities, not just third density. And I'll talk about densities a little more later too, but in your own density, third density, within your planetary sphere, which means under the ground, and also within the inner or angelic realms, which means the unseen planes of our reality. Each of these groups developing a social memory complex and then dedicating the social memory complex to the singular service to the one infinite creator may join this particular confederation. And I'll talk about the nature of the social memory complex pretty soon also, because the social memory complex is basically when all of the beings in that planetary consciousness get on the same page, and then they become telepathically united in their minds. So some examples of the assistance that we've been receiving from this confederation have been soul transfers from other planets, genetic upgrades and changes, tweaks. Some positive teachings have come, many positive teachings come through telepathic communications, whether or not you're aware of it. And the tarot originally came to the Egyptians through visions that were given to the priests of that era. Some positive teachings have come through in-person physical contacts, but were very limited in the number that they attempted because of the blowback, the negative effects that come from that, which I'll talk about. And Ra helped with pyramids. Other entities help with pyramids as well, and crystal technologies in general. Sometimes, in rare cases, saucer craft have been given, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. Tesla and Einstein were given technical information telepathically to aid humanity. And also, they have helped when in instances of nuclear blasts at Nagasaki and Hiroshima, there are people whose souls were literally disintegrated. And one of the things the Confederation entities have done is to help reintegrate those souls. And that's a mystery too, that even is possible. But that's an example that they talked about. And also, these Confederation groups will send souls, they send wanderer souls to come incarnate to lighten the planetary vibration as they think can be benefited. So there are backfires to a lot of these. Their assistance has consistently been backfiring. The spiritual teachings that they give can be perverted by beings with self-service agenda. And the more light, the more wisdom that is gained from a teaching, the more potential there is to pervert that for negative uses and create a power structure around it, where then the people on the lower levels of the power structure are no longer receiving the benefit of the teaching. There's been genetic improvements, but some of those improvements led to some beings being stronger and smarter than others, and then being sort of narcissistic and putting themselves on a pedestal over others because of those genetic upgrades. And there have been physical contacts which have led to people believing that these are the gods to be worshipped, and that misses the point of the teachings as well. And technology obviously has been misused. And they said that Tesla's information specifically led to some destructive uses, such as the Philadelphia experiment. Einstein's information, if you think about it, E equals MC squared, that led to the Manhattan Project and the atom bomb. If you think about, if you know that matter can be turned into large amounts of energy, that clearly is a danger. So this is why the Confederation is now taking what they call a more cautious approach, and they explain this in the context of an instance in 1954. They said in the case of the Russians, some electrogravitic flying saucer technology was given from one of the Confederation in an attempt. They said 27 years ago in 1981, so it was 1954. They made an attempt to share information and bring about peace among their peoples. The entities giving this information were in error, but we as the Confederation did many things at the end of this cycle in attempts to aid your harvest. I'll talk about harvest later, from which we learned the folly of certain types of aid. That is a contributing factor to our more cautious approach at this date, even as the need is power upon power greater and your people's call is greater and greater. So you can read more about that in session 8 of the material. That's when they got into a lot of the UFO subjects, which I won't go too deep into that, but just look up session 8. And that session 8 material was actually left unpublished in the original 4 volumes because they weren't sure if this would even be helpful, because it was so hard to believe. I had secret space program related information in there. And Don Elkins actually said in session 8, it was just, he couldn't even believe it. And then he died in 1984, and they published in like 1998. They finally published to the public a lot of that information in book 5, which was originally called the personal material. But the raw contact books that you get now, the latest edition, have everything in order. So that's what I recommend. So on the flip side of this, we have the negative callings from people on Earth that lead to the answering from the Orion group. The Orion group is called that because those of the Orion constellation have the upper hand and thus rule the other members of this service to self-oriented group that operates in the galaxy. Some people might call this the Draco. That's speculation. That's not a term that Ra used. They said there are very few third density in this group, a large number of fourth density, a similarly large number of fifth density, with very few sixth density, which would be lower level sixth density. Their numbers are perhaps 1/10 of ours, meaning the 1/10 of the confederation, the positive confederation. So their power is the same as ours. The law of one blinks neither at the light or the darkness, but I can put an emphasis here that it does seem to be a general rule that there's 1/10 the amount of the negative in this galaxy. Then, so it's not like it's completely overwhelming. So some examples of what the Orion group offers. The fourth density negative habit is that of offering temptations and of energizing pre-existing distortions. And they give a list of temptations at 1.2. The Orion group cannot interfere directly, but only through pre-existing distortions of mind-body-spirit complexes. And that's generally their term for people is mind-body-spirit complex. But this is an important point. They cannot interfere unless there's something that is allowing that invitation through free will. The normal gambit of the fourth density, what they also call minions at one point, the normal gambit is the attempting of the entities or groups of entities away from total polarization towards service to others and towards aggrandizement of the self or of social organizations with which the self identifies. So this, we can often miss this distinction here. It's not just about individuals developing egos. It's when you're strongly identified with an organization and you develop an ego around that association. That is one of the key ways in which they manipulate us. So if fourth density temptations, shall we say, towards distortion of ego are not successful, then the fifth density negative entities step in and they think in terms of the removal of light. So if you're very strong in your will and you're not going to back away from love of others, they give an example of what this looks like in session 67. They said they would give an example of stepping out in front of traffic because the suggestion is that there is no traffic. So this is, even if you're very intuitive, you should still look both ways. So a bigger, higher level perspective on what's going on right now. They say that we're in a 75,000 year cycle. It's broken up into 3 25,000 year cycles. They don't say exactly what we should be expecting at the end of each cycle, but this is just how the evolution of Earth has unfolded in these cycles. And it seems as though they may break down even further, but it's at the end of these 25,000 year cycles that's when the potentials of needing to move people to other planets comes in play based on people's evolution, which they would basically say is the harvest. The harvest is like the evaluation of the souls and basically like the fruits of the garden, and which souls are ready now to move on if they need to move on. But I'll talk about this much more here. In the beginning stages we're in this beginning stages now of a shift into fourth density consciousness. And in the present time, they say, you will find a sharp increase in people with fourth density energies, potentials. There will also be a sharp increase in the short run of negatively oriented or polarized people and social complexes, negatively oriented people and negatively oriented social complexes due to the polarizing conditions of the sharp delineation between fourth density characteristics and third density self-service orientation. So this divide is looking more and more sharp right now as we get closer and closer to this greater shift. As people, it's almost like the baggage is coming up to the surface and we have to deal with it. But eventually, they don't say how long this will be in the future, but those who remain in fourth density upon this plane will be of the positive orientation, service to others orientation. And many will come from elsewhere as there are few to harvest. And it's unclear if this is still the case, but the idea here is that other souls from other planets are being incarnated or will come here to populate a very wonderful planet that will be able to support the fourth density consciousnesses. So a little bit more on the nature of how to view this shift happening. They said the nature of vibration is such that it may be seen as having mathematically straight or narrow steps. These steps may be seen as having boundaries. As one approaches a boundary, getting to the next step, an effort must be made to cross that boundary. And the necessity for graduation to fourth density is an ability to use, welcome, and enjoy a certain intensity of the white light of the one infinite creator. So we need to use, welcome, and enjoy the light of the fourth density to step into fourth density. The measurement would be that of an entity walking up a set of stairs, each of which was imbued with a certain quality of light. The stair upon which an entity stopped would be either third density light or fourth density light. Between these two stairs lies the threshold. To cross that threshold is difficult. And this is also, I'll talk about it in the future, but they talk about a need to be oriented towards service to others at least 50% of the time. And this signals the willingness to cross that threshold also. So the new cosmic energies are now coming in, and they say the fourth density is the vibrational spectrum. Your time-space continuum has spiraled your planetary sphere and your star, your sun, into this vibration. So literally the whole solar system is moving into this vibration of energy. This will cause the planetary sphere itself to electromagnetically realign its vibrational webs, magnetic systems, so that the Earth will thus be fourth density magnetized, as you might call it. And the first harbingers of this were approximately 45 years ago when they channeled this. So that would be 1936 was when this shift in energy started happening, when the energies were vibrating more intensely through the 40-year period. Oh, and the energies as the future of the channel material, 40 years from the future of 1981, 40-year period preceding final movement of vibratory matter through the quantum leap. So it's becoming more intense as we approach what they call the quantum leap, and that was left ambiguous as well. But the importance right now for our planet is to get on the same page with regards to the value of love and forgiveness. And they say the thought forms of your people during this transition period are such that the mind-body-spirit complexes of both individual and societies are scattered throughout the spectrum instead of becoming able to grasp the needle and point the compass in one direction. So we're all kind of going in different directions. Thus, the entry into the vibration of love and understanding is not effective with the present societal complex. Thus, the harvest shall be such that many will repeat the third density cycle they're implying on other planets. The energies of your wanderers, your teachers, and your adepts at this time are all bent upon increasing the harvest. However, there are few to harvest. And I presume this means after you die that you'll have an evaluation period. I don't know exactly when, but you'll have an evaluation that would then say, is a different planet right for you, or will you remain and keep reincarnating on this planet? Penetration into the eighth or intelligent infinity level, on the other hand. So this is like another way you can look at harvest. They say penetration into the eighth density using all the chakras activated, or intelligent infinity, allows the mind-body-spirit complex to be harvested if it wishes at any time space during the cycle. So there is technically something that we can all do individually that will allow us to have an ascension experience and become more able to manifest our new vehicle if we wish. But that is a very rare exception to what would be the normal process of, at the end of the cycle, that's the time in which there's the traditional harvest of entities with the assistance of what they call the harvesters. They're angelic groups, the ET Confederation groups, and the guardians from the next octave of experience are the different harvesters. I probably don't have time to get into that much. But you can find this all on the Law of One info website under the harvest category of information. So once we're all on the same page, once the needle is pointed in one direction, then that's when the social memory complex forms. The fourth density is more dense and is far more difficult to hide the true vibrations of the mind-body-spirit complex. This enables fourth density negatives as well as positives the chance to form social memory complexes because the true vibrations of others are more apparent. So a social memory complex forms when an entire group of entities are of one orientation or seeking. The group memory lost to the individuals and the roots of the tree of mind then becomes known to the social complex, thus creating a social memory complex. So right now, we're in a situation where the roots of the lower, deeper aspects of our mind are lost to us. We cannot easily process where all this mental activity and thought activity is coming from on its lowest level. It's sort of popping up into, thoughts seem to pop up from the unconscious into the conscious mind. We don't always know where they come from. But when we have this denser conscious activation, then we can see deeper down, oh, I see your thoughts, I see your thoughts, I see we're all connected. And this is the social memory complex, almost like an internet for the mind will be opened up to us, where we have all the memory of all the people. And this would include the Akashic mind levels, where all the history of people's awareness of what's been going on Earth becomes a part of our potentials to tap into. So in a social memory complex, all experience of each entity is available to the whole of the complex. Thus, the creator knows more of its creation in each entity, partaking of this communion of entities. And the Orion group, Crusaders, the negative guys, will move in their chariots, which spaceships. They move throughout the galaxy to try to conquer the planetary social complexes before they reach the stage of achieving social memory. Because once a planet like ours achieves social memory, we can no longer be tricked. We can no longer be deluded into thinking that we would prefer this negative way of doing things. So that's a huge point about this, is that this is a really critical period for the negative entities to try to shift us away from recognizing we can actually be one in our minds and our hearts. So the requirements for harvest, as I said before, they recommend 51% dedication to the welfare of other selves. But they say this is also as difficult as the negative criteria, which would be 5% dedication to other selves, or 95% service to self orientation. And the sinkhole of indifference is between these two. So there's a lot of indifference on this planet, and they call that the sinkhole of indifference that people get trapped in with not caring one way or the other. It becomes a life of indifference for a lot of people. But they say balance is not indifference, but rather the observer not blinded by any feelings of separation, but rather fully imbued with love. So I love that phrase, not being blinded by feelings of separation is the way to step into the truer balance where the heart is active. And the balance of a negative entity would be when they're closing down their heart and they try to balance the intensity of the lower triad, the red, orange, yellow. But a positive balance would be opening the heart and no longer feeling separate from others. And the faculty of faith or will needs to be understood, nourished, and developed in order to have an entity which seeks past the boundary of third density. So you have to have some faith that love is worth it. Those entities which are unbalanced, especially as to the primary rays, which would be red, yellow, and blue, those entities will not be capable of sustaining the impact of the love and light of intelligent infinity to the extent necessary for harvest. And so this balance across our different energy centers is partly why, like, what Caressa does is important. It's why you should really think about your thought life, and we can all have moments of great love and inspiration that are then clouded by other experiences that we haven't broken through, and that can be a sign of an imbalance in your overall energy patterns of your system. But I'll talk about the transition now. They said the transition period could be between 100 and 700 years. 100 and 700 years is a huge difference in their estimate that they gave back in 1981. And this just kind of goes to show how chaotic things are right now. And we all get to sort of create our new reality, and it could go in many different directions. But there are, at this space-time, beings incarnate which have begun fourth density works. However, the third density climate of the planetary consciousness is retarding the process. At this particular nexus, the possibility probability vortices indicate somewhere between 100 and 700 of your years as the transition period. This cannot be accurate due to the volatility of your peoples at this time. But during this phase, they say the creation of green ray density bodily complexes, bodies that can support the higher energies, bodies that are more psychic naturally, the creation of these bodies will be gradual and will take place beginning with your third density type of physical vehicle, and through the means of bisexual reproduction, become, by evolutionary processes, the fourth density body complexes. And this is starting to happen. They say, back in 1981, they said, I think 35,000 beings on Earth were in this category of having what they called the transitional body. But it's much, much more now, I'm sure. Many are incarnating with what you may call a double body in activation. The entities birthing these fourth density bodies, these entities, experience a great feeling, the women giving birth, experience a great feeling of the connection and the use of spiritual energies during the pregnancy. This is due to the necessity for the manifesting of the double body. This transitional body is able to appreciate fourth density vibratory complexes as the instreaming increases without the accompanying disruption of the third density body. So these magnetic energies, I think it's literally relating to electrical and magnetic energies, are too intense for our current bodies. And so that's why inevitably we do have to have new bodies that will be more capable of manifesting and working with the higher energies. So the fourth density souls that are now incarnating, who are consciously aware of those fourth density understandings to work with fourth density on Earth as they come into those bodies. And these are energies which the third density is unable to remember due to the forgetting or the veiling. These entities begin the fourth density cycle in our time now with the added attraction to an entity oriented towards service to others of dwelling in a troubled environment, a troubled third density environment, and offering its love and compassion. So I thought this was worth pointing out. They see this as a great attraction to be in a very troubled environment. And I don't know how easily you guys can see it that way, but it's quite wonderful. We get to share so much love to people who are looking for it. So the typical third density cycle of evolution, they said, would be 3 cycles of 25,000 years. And at the end of each 25,000 year cycle, those who had progressed may be harvested. But at the end of the 75,000 year cycle, all are quote unquote harvested regardless of their progress, which I think means there just has to be a determination made at that point at the end of 75,000 years. For during that time, the planet itself has moved through the useful part of that dimension and begins to cease being useful for the lower levels of vibration within that density. And I don't know what this will look like, but this is a fascinating clue that something very significant may be about to happen on Earth that would make it so that Earth will no longer be useful for the kind of lessons that we've been trying to learn in our current societal complexes. We may have to work together a lot more, I think is what might be hinted at here in order to survive in the future. But that's my speculation. It is more toward the median or mean of third density developments through the one infinite universe that there be a small harvest after the first cycle, the remainder having significantly polarized, the second cycle having a much larger harvest, the remainder being even more significantly polarized, and the third cycle culminating the process and the harvest being completed. So our 75,000 year cycle has been much, much slower on each of these points. There was no harvest the first cycle. I'll talk about there was no harvest technically at the second cycle, and this is what they would normally be expecting to see. So talking about the history of our solar system now, we can go back 700,000 years to Maldek, which was a planet that existed between what we now see as Mars and Jupiter. So it's like the asteroid belt blew up. It was a planet that blew up. The peoples of Maldek had a civilization similar to what we know of as Atlantis, and that it gained much technological information and used it without care for the preservation of their sphere, following to a majority extent the ways of service to self. This was, however, for the most part, couched in a sincere belief or thought structure which seemed to be positive and of service to others. So they believed on a logical level they were being of service to others, but the destruction that racked their biosphere and caused its disintegration resulted from war. These entities were so traumatized by this occurrence of their planet becoming uninhabitable that they were in what you may call a societal complex knot or tangle of fear. And it took a long time for the Confederation entities to begin to access these souls that were caught up in this knot of fear. And many souls from Maldek are working their understanding complexes through a series of what you would call karmic restitutions. They dwell within your deeper underground passageways and are known to you as Bigfoot, or one type of Bigfoot they talked about in the books. So some of the souls from Maldek are currently incarnated in Bigfoot bodies, and this was apparently much more common earlier in Earth's history. And they said this was 705,000 years ago when Maldek was blown apart by nuclear war, 600,000 years ago when they were finally reached. It took 100,000 years for these angelic or ET entities to actually be of service to these beings who were very caught up, not in bodies, but they were in souls that were very confused. And then 500,000 years ago is when they finally were able to transfer these souls into the bodies used for karma alleviation, which were what we call second density or animal kind of bodies. So this alleviation mechanism, the Bigfoot body, was designed by the placement of this consciousness in this second dimensional physical chemical complex. And these bodies are not able to be dexterous or manipulative to the extent which is appropriate to the workings of third density distortions or the mind complex. And if you think about what I said before with the thumb and building tools for war, this is like a safety shutdown switch where you guys are in bodies now where you can have a nice time and you don't have to be tempted into building nuclear bombs anymore. Not that Bigfoot are not very advanced in other ways, psychic connections, because the veiling in the second density body is much, much less. So they naturally can see where people are. They can see, they can understand a lot more with their natural intuitive abilities in those bodies as well. Many of these entities were able to remove the accumulation of what you call karma, thus being able to accept a third density cycle within a third density body. Most of those beings so succeeding have incarnated elsewhere in the creation for this succeeding cycle in third density. As this planet reached third density, some few of these entities became able to join the vibration of the sphere in the third density form. So these souls are now among us. There remain a few who have not yet alleviated, though, and therefore these Bigfoot entities remain. Another example of very slow learning would be the planet Mars. And when Don Elkins asked, where do the people who were first like us on Earth come from? They said they came from Mars. And the entities of the red planet were attempting to learn the laws of love, just like Earth is right now. However, these tendencies of these people towards bellicose actions caused such difficulties in their atmospheric environment of their planet that it became inhospitable for a third density experience for the end of its cycle. Thus, the red planet entities now were unharvested, and continue in your illusion. This was 75,000 years ago that they were transferred. And they also called this like a cloning process. There's some genetic changes that occurred to, it's not like we look like the Mars people did. They also said there was some possible infringement of free will by a Confederation entity who did this job of the cloning of their bodies and they tried to give them a nice suit. And they represented 1/2 of our population 75,000 years ago. 1/2 of the people on Earth were from Mars then. 1/4 were from the naturally evolving second density beings. Other animals who had evolved became able to become people at that time. And 1/4 of the population was that. And the other 1/4 of the population came from as many as 14 or more other planetary spheres. Other planets started shipping in souls whose entities chose this planetary sphere for the third density work. And more recently, now that we have billions of people more than we did back then, they seem to suggest in session 59 that billions of these people have been those from Maldek. So there's a strong suggestion that this is what Corey Goode had called the super Earth. There's billions of people on that planet. Those of Maldek, having now become able to take up third density once again, were gradually loosed from the self-imposed limitations of form. So people who blew up their planet and people who made their planet inhospitable are the majority of who is here now. So you have to admit that we're kind of doing pretty well considering we have nuclear weapons. We haven't been using them that much. Those from Deneb were who needed a new planet. They said were beings who initially inhabited China, and they moved out because their sun was very old and wasn't providing the conditions necessary. Some history of Lemuria or Mu. I think it's easier to search for good information on Lemuria if you search for the word Mu. There's a book by a guy named James Churchwood called The Lost Continent of Mu, the Motherland of Man, published in 1926. And this was apparently based on translations of 2 sets of ancient tablets from India. This guy was trained on how to read some of these ancient tablets. Very few people in India had this. A lot of this is lost to historical records, and people will dispute that this is actually true. However, the information in this book, The Lost Continent of Mu, is what kind of popularized a lot of what we know about it, this continent. And it seems to be lined up in a lot of ways what the Law of One says about it. So the Mu Confederation contact, beings attempting to help This was in the period going back older than 50,000 years, that time frame. Some Confederation entities attempted to assist 58,000 years ago, assisting very gently, very gradually to boost along the evolution. But these beings were somewhat of a primitive nature on this continent, which was in the Pacific area, but who had very advanced spiritual distortions. Their civilization's peak was 53,000 years ago. It was a helpful and harmless place which washed beneath the ocean during a readjustment of your sphere's tectonic plates through no action of their own. So they didn't blow up their continent, but unfortunately, the Earth decided it was time to move on with that. They set out those who survived and reached many places in Russia, North America, and South America. The readjustment that happened with the Earth's continent was because there was a confluence of energies at the ending of the major cycle. This encouraged what was already an inevitable adjustment in the movement of the surfaces of your planetary sphere. So I don't think science really understands this very well yet, that these kinds of major shifts can happen with the Earth changes. But the Confederation aid was limited, going back to that first cycle over 50,000 years ago. For the most part, the participation was limited, as it was appropriate to allow the full travel of the workings of the confusion mechanism to operate in order to for the planetary entities to develop that which they wished in freedom with their own thinking. And they said it is often the case that a third density planetary cycle will take place in such a way that there need be no outside or other self-aid in the form of information. Normally, they don't want to get involved. They say rather the entities themselves are able to work themselves towards the appropriate polarizations and goals of the third density. But the seeds did not sprout. Where Don Elkins asked the question, was the Confederation watching to see and expecting to see a harvest at the end of this first 25,000 year cycle, which is 50,000 years ago, in which there were both positive and negative beings ready? And Ross said, this is correct. You may see our role in the first major cycle as that of the gardener who, knowing the season, is content to wait for the spring. When the springtime does not occur, the seeds do not sprout, then it is that the gardener must work in the garden. So this is probably the best analogy for positive ET contact I've ever seen, is that they're watching us like a garden, and they know that the gardening needs some tending and nurturing. We're not growing in love and wisdom and understanding and harmony as well as they would like to see in a garden. It is more toward the median or mean of third density developments. I mentioned this earlier, that there be a small harvest at the first cycle, the remainder having significantly polarized. So we continued to fail in the second cycle. They said that in the first cycle, we used to live for 900 years. People were living 900 years as the average amount of time these bodies that we're in right now are apparently supposed to be able to live and grow and learn lessons. And it's much more beneficial, they say, to be able to live longer because you can learn more wisdom and handle more. But I'll explain what's happened in a moment here. So the drop from the 700-year lifespan at the end of the 50,000 years ago, it was 700-year lifespan. Then 25,000 years ago, the lifespan went down to less than 100 years for most entities. And this drop in the lifespan from 700 to 100-year lifespan occurred because of a lack of service to others. This was Don's question. And Ross said this is in part correct, that it occurred because of lack of service to others. But by the end of the second cycle, the law of responsibility had begun to be effectuated by the increasing ability of entities. And the law of responsibility, I'll talk about in a minute. This is similar to a karma around developing knowledge and having to put it into good use. But the law of responsibility became more in effect because of entities being able to grasp those lessons which they were intending to learn. Entities had discovered many ways to indicate a bellicose nature, a fighting nature, not only as tribes or nations, but in personal relationships, each with the other. The concept of barter having given way, in many cases, to the concept of money. So money literally shortened our lifespan in that sense. Also, the concept of ownership having won ascendancy over the concept of non-ownership on an individual or group basis. People did not like to share. Each entity then was offered many more subtle ways of demonstrating either service towards others or service to self, with the distortion of the manipulation of others. Each lesson was understood, those lessons of sharing, of giving, of receiving, and free gratitude, each lesson could be rejected in practice. So when you have the lesson and you reject it, then that becomes more of a hardship on your spirit. Without demonstrating the fruits of such learning, the lifespan became greatly reduced. The ways of honor duty were not being accepted. And they, as a general principle, they said the shortening of the lifespan is a distortion of the law of one, which suggests that an individual entity not receive more experience, an individual entity not receive more experience and more intensity than it may bear. Thus, the shortened lifespan is due to the necessity for removing an entity from the intensity of experience which ensues when wisdom and love are, having been rejected, reflected back into the consciousness of the creator without being accepted as part of the self. So it's a lack of integration and appreciation of our experiences. We're stressed out all the time. This then causing the entity to have the need for healing and for much evaluation of the incarnation. So it would be hard to process all this junk that we accumulate if we didn't have the chance to keep dying and reevaluating it and then trying again with new incarnations. Those entities which have in some way learned / taught themselves the appropriate distortions for rapid growth can still work within the confines of the shorter lifespan. However, the greater preponderance of your entities find themselves in what may be called a perpetual childhood. Yeah. So at the end of the last 25,000 year cycle, there was one bright light in South America that was noteworthy. It's kind of an exception to the trend line, what I've been explaining. In the sense of the greatness of technology, there were no great societies during the last 25,000 years. But in South America, there grew to be a great vibratory distortion towards love. These entities were harvestable at the end of the second major cycle without ever having formed strong social or technological complexes. And these entities did live 900 years, they said. There were 150 of them, though, who were harvestable. They're considered wanderers by Ra at this time because they never left the Earth plane. They could have left and gone to a nicer planet. They chose not to. And this is because they were gently nudged by a confederation entity, a confederation light being appeared to these entities, bearing that which may be called a shield of light. I don't know what that would look like. It spoke of the oneness and infinity of all creation and of those things which await those ready for harvest. It described in golden words the beauties of love as lived. It then allowed a telepathic linkage to progressively show those who were interested the plight of third density when seen as a planetary complex. And because of this progressive revealing to these 150 individuals what Earth was going through, they made the decision to stay and not move on, but to stay on Earth. And they gave examples of these souls as being St. Augustine, St. Teresa, and St. Francis of Assisi. The lack of harvest was very concerning to Ra. They said, so since these entities stay, there's technically no harvest. And Don asked, what was the result? What was the reaction of the Confederation? The reaction was, we became concerned. And then Don asked, was any action taken immediately? Or did you wait for a call? And Ra said, the Council of Saturn, which I don't have time really to go into, but the Council of Saturn is a group that helps make very hard decisions about how to not infringe on the free will of beings on Earth. They acted only in allowing entry into third density of other mind-body-spirit complexes from other planets of third density. But these are entities just seeking further third density experience. This was done randomly so that free will would not be violated, for there was not yet a call. So basically, they just tried to mix it up with new souls 25,000 years ago. Another example here of the slow learning would be the Atlanteans, the Atlantean race, which, and of course, many people will use different ideas around Atlantis and call it Atlantis, but specifically Ra broke it way up 15,000 years, maybe 20,000 years even, they said, is what they're calling the Atlantean race. The Atlantean race was a very conglomerate social complex which began to form approximately 31,000 years ago. It was slow growing in a very agrarian society. They were doing a lot of agricultural work until 15,000 years ago. And then it reached very quickly a high technological understanding, which caused it to be able to use intelligent infinity in a less informative manner. And I don't have time to explain that, and that's probably too hard to understand, but entities of the Confederation appeared unto the Atlanteans, who had reached a certain level of philosophical understanding, to encourage and inspire studies in the mystery of unity. So they were trying to boost The Confederation were trying to boost the Atlanteans, who looked like they were ready for teachings about the mystery of unity. However, requests being made for healing and other understandings, information was passed having to do with crystals and the building of pyramids, as well as temples, as you would call them, which were associated with this training. But the difficulties became apparent as those trained in the use of these crystals began to attempt to use these crystal powers for those things other than healing, as they were involved not only with learning, but became involved with what you would call the governmental structure. So they became able to form life forms using this crystal technology and what they call intelligent infinity. That's a big subject I don't have time for. This they began to do instead of healing and perfecting their own mind, body, spirit complexes, turning their distortion towards the negative. So 11,000 years ago, the first of the Atlantean Wars caused approximately 40% of this population to leave the density by means of disintegration of the body. Eventually, many were displaced after many wars. The Atlanteans were displaced to other continents due to societal actions, both upon Atlantis and upon those areas of what you would call North African deserts, to which some Atlanteans had gone after the first conflict. Earth changes continued due to these, what you would call nuclear bombs and other crystal weapons, sinking the last great land masses 9,600 years ago. So in the case of the Atlanteans, enlargements upon the information that the Confederation had given resulted in those activities distorted towards bellicosity. So this was a big backfire for these entities trying to help, the Confederation entities trying to help the Atlanteans. And in Egypt and South America, the cases of ETs coming to help back then was not as devastating as it was with the case of Atlantis. But all of these cases were far from the original intention of the Confederation. It was clear to not only us, but also to the Council of Saturn and the Guardians that our methods were not appropriate for this particular sphere. So our attitude was one of caution, observing and continuing attempts to creatively discover methods whereby contact from our entities could be of service with the least distortion and, above all, with the least possibility of becoming perversions or antithesis of our intentions in sharing information. So it did happen with the Egyptians. They said, we came to your peoples to enunciate the law of one. Then they walked among us. Our intention when we walked among your peoples was to manifest that which was requested by those learning. We wish to impress upon those who wish to learn of unity, that in unity all paradoxes are resolved, all that is broken is healed, all that is forgotten is brought to light. They had no specific teaching plan, just wanted to receive questions. We spoke to one who heard and understood and was in a position to decree the law of one. However, the priests and peoples of that era quickly distorted our message, robbing it of the compassion with which unity is informed by its very nature. Since it contains all, it cannot abhor any. And they said we removed ourselves from the now hypocritical position which we had allowed ourselves to be placed in. And other myths, other understandings again took over in that particular society complex. So they didn't die from nuclear war, they just perverted the teachings. And it also happened in South America with a different group, not Ra, but a different group walked among those in South American continent in the last 25,000 years, being called by similar desires, the Egyptians, because of the entity's desire to learn of the manifestations of the sun. They worshipped the source of light and life. Thus, these entities were visited by light beings, not unlike ourselves. Instructions were given, and they were more accepted by and less distorted than ours. And this actually led these South American beings to begin to conduct a series of, to build a series of underground and hidden cities, including pyramid structures. And Ross said, as in our experience with the Egyptians, the teachings were, for the most part, eventually greatly distorted, greatly perverted to the extent in later times of actual human sacrifice rather than the healing of humans. So you can just speculate if they said something like you want to die to yourself or die to your ego, that somebody may have at some point just decided, I'm just going to twist this and say these people need to die for the benefit of the greater good. But that could be completely because of the Orion influence, and this is just speculation how they could have twisted something completely into human sacrifice to that degree. Thus, the social memory complex is also given the honor duty. This group that helped the South Americans is given the honor duty of remaining until those distortions are worked out from their distortion complexes. So it's like what Corey Good has called this the parachute effect, where a race who gets involved with another lower density race will be held back by the karma of that race that they incurred. They caused the karma of the human sacrifice. Therefore, they have to stay around, even though they're not directly helping. They're doing everything they can to find a way to help. So I thought I should also share that there are efforts going on to help us that don't relate to this level of interaction, that they just relate to what they call the thought war. So Don Elkins asked, you spoke of an Orion Confederation and a battle being fought between the Confederation and the Orion Confederation. Is it possible to convey any concept of how this battle is fought? And Ross said, picture, if you will, your mind. Picture it then in total unity with the all other minds of your society. You are then single-minded and are that which is a weak electrical charge in your physical illusion now become an enormously powerful machine whereby thoughts may be projected as things. So working together as one consciousness allows us to do a lot with our consciousness. In this endeavor, the Orion group charges or attacks the Confederation arms with light. The result, a standoff, as you would call it, both energies, positive and negative, being somewhat depleted by this and needing to regroup. The negative being depleted through failure to manipulate, the positive being depleted through failure to accept that which is given. So these energies have less necessity to be balanced in our space-time on Earth, thus lessening the chances of planetary annihilation. So it's because the intensity of this thought plane war that we have less warfare on Earth unfolding at this time. They also said that thoughts become beings in the fourth density energies. And in your illusion, this is normally not so. And you could speculate how you want with what that might mean. And Don also asked, has the vibration of the photon of all particles increased in frequency already as we're stepping into these fourth density energies? And Ross said this is correct. It is this influence, this increase in vibration, which has begun to cause thoughts to become things. As an example, you may observe the thoughts of anger becoming those cells of the physical bodily complex going out of control to become what you call the cancer. And I would say we still have always had the ability to manifest with our thoughts. It's been on a lower vibration nature, and it hasn't been as immediate an effect as it is as we step into the higher consciousness energies. Our thoughts are more apparent as the things that they're representing in the manifest illusion. So back on the subject of disclosure, just for a minute, we're running out of time here, but it's important to mention that Ra mentioned that the technology your peoples possess at this time is capable of resolving each and every limitation which plagues your social memory complex at this present nexus of experience. However, the concerns of some of your beings with distortions towards what you would call powerful energy cause these solutions, these advanced technologies, to be withheld until the solutions are so needed that those with the desire for power can then become further distorted in the direction of power by giving them out in small doses, basically. So I would say it's important to know those of like mind which together seek shall far more surely find. So this is kind of why we're together at a disclosure conference. We're seeking disclosure. We want to find disclosure. So I highly recommend, if you haven't checked it out, check out meetup.com in your area. You don't need to come to a big conference to find people like you in your area. If you have a bigger city that you live in, I recommend meetup.com for finding other groups, starting a group if you haven't found a group that you like, and expect that there's people like you who want to come together and work together on, I did a webinar with Corey Good on activism, and you could think of activism in different ways, but just being more involved to help your community wake up and be gently guided as needed. And I also created a service on essentialworks.tv/map where you can put in the city that you live in, and you can find other people who are also on that social platform who live in your same city. Ross said that the service available for our Confederation offering to those who call, the Confederation can offer a service that is equivalent to the square of the distortion need integrated with the free will of those who are not aware of the unity of creation. This means that there's an exponential added effect when people are working together, putting out a calling, putting out a desire, and seeking together when they're of that like vibration, especially if you're aware of the unity of creation, because that's the, this mathematical factor is divided by those who are not aware of the unity of creation. So Don gave an estimate. if only 10 entities on Earth requested your services were of this like vibration, how would you compute their call? And Ross said this would come out to 1,012 times as much effectiveness with just 10 people working together. So they said, thus the call of many of your peoples is many, many powered and overwhelmingly heard to the infinite reaches of the one creation. There are beings who want to help us. We just have to work together and seek change together. But Ra also said that those who are currently most active in attempting to remake or alter our society are generally those working from feelings of being correct personally or of having the answers personally, which will put power in a more correct configuration. There are some few whose desires to aid society are of a green ray, the heart, nature, or above. These entities, however, are few due to the understanding, may we say, of fourth density, that universal love freely given is more to be desired than principalities or even the rearrangement of peoples or political structures. So it's just the natural tendency of people with open hearts to not want to control or manipulate people, because really the teaching is about learning to become more loving and accepting, to help us acclimate into this new vibration. It doesn't mean that there's no value in potentially getting involved in politics or something like that. I can't rule that out. The most fragile entity may be more balanced than one with extreme energy and activity in service to others, due to the fastidiousness with which the will is focused upon the use of experience and knowing the self. So here, the amount of service to others that you're engaged in is not as important as being balanced in yourself, because of the importance of focusing on the use of your own experience and knowing yourself and navigating your own distortions through the awareness of what's going on in your mind and what you need to work on, and doing that first before you attempt to be of greater service to others. So I would call this free will first activism. And they gave an example with Christian evangelists. When Don asked about it, they said, in examining the polarity of service to others, working the free will must be seen as paramount. Many Christian evangelists are attempting to generate positive changes in consciousness while abridging free will. They're trying to push you so that you don't go to hell. This causes the blockage of the magical nature of the working, except in those cases wherein an entity freely desires to accept the working of the evangelist, as you have called it. So there's an emphasis here where a person who's trying to give a spiritual message can do a lot more if they're doing it in a frame where the person they're teaching to is free, completely left free to make up their own mind about anything. And Jesus did this. They said Jesus offered himself as a teacher to those which gathered to hear, and even then he spoke as through a veil, so as to leave room for those not wishing to hear. So they say Jesus did not speak the truth just because people came to hear it. He understood. I assume this is like a telepathic thing. You have to understand the vibrations of others and not speak on the subjects which will turn people away from their current path of evolution, which is a very delicate process, but this is why there were a lot of parables in the Bible, I believe. So Don asked, is it possible to help an entity to reach fourth density in these last days? And Ross said, it is impossible to help another being directly. It is only possible to make a catalyst available in whatever form, the most important catalyst being the radiation of realization of oneness with the Creator from the self, less important being information such as we share with you. I'll talk about this a little bit more. But they said, we ourselves do not feel an urgency for this information to be widely disseminated. We encourage a dispassionate attempt to share information without concern for numbers or quick growth among others. And this also helps with free will preservation when you're not overly passionate about trying to get somebody to believe something. That you attempt to make this information available is, in your term, your service. The attempt, if it reaches one, reaches all. We cannot offer shortcuts to enlightenment. Enlightenment is of the moment, is an opening to intelligent infinity. It can be only accomplished by the self or the self. Another self cannot teach, learn enlightenment, but only teach, learn information, inspiration, or sharing of love, of mystery, of the unknown, that makes the other self reach out and begin the seeking process that ends in a moment. But who can know when an entity will open the gate to the present? And regarding being of greatest possible service to others, they rephrased this a different way. They said, the best way to be of service to others is the constant attempt to seek to share the love of the Creator as it is known to the inner self. This involves self-knowledge and the ability to open the self to other self without hesitation. Hesitation is one of the things that holds back from being of service. This involves radiating that which is the essence or the heart. It is only possible in dealing with others to make catalyst available in whatever form, the most important being the radiation realization of oneness with the Creator. So how do we know the nature of this oneness with the Creator? How do we understand the self as the Creator? How do we share the love of the Creator? And really, there's many different layers of the mind. I won't have to get time to get much into this, but I thought it's worth mentioning that we can be working on from different aspects of our mind when we're trying to understand who we are, what we are, and our oneness with the Creator. And they gave many instances of a discussion about the tree of mind, which it's also described kind of like a concentric circle is the way I've drawn it here. But this is a tree where you have on the outer branches of the tree, the conscious feelings, emotions, and intellectual thoughts are what we see with our conscious mind. And then deeper down, we have our individual memories and our intuitive mind. And then deeper down, you end up with, many people know that this exists, but there's an Akashic, racial, and planetary mind, which is something like Edgar Cayce was able to tap into to read the Akashic records. And that's always accessible when you just break down the distortions of the deeper aspects of your own self and your own mind that are blocking you from having access to that part of the mind. And then deeper down is what they call the archetypical mind. And then the deepest source is what they call the cosmic mind, or the infinite mind. But the archetypical mind is a study of the major arcana of the tarot, which is what I've been pursuing a lot with a podcast that I started with some friends. The archetypical mind is part of that mind which informs all experience. And it's a little bit easier to understand than some of the other aspects of the mind, and on the surface level, but it's an infinite depth that you can go into with the study and appreciation of the nature of the archetypes in yourself. But the archetypical mind is refinement to the cosmic mind that was created by the mind of the galaxy. And this is not the deepest root of mind, but certainly the most informative in some ways. And they also refer to the archetypes as representing humanity becoming more like a peacock's tail. The question was asked, what is the ultimate objective to this logos in designing this archetypical mind as it did? And Ross said, each logos desires to create a more eloquent expression of experience of the Creator by the Creator. The archetypical mind is intended to heighten this ability to express the Creator in patterns more like that of the fan peacock's tail, with each facet of the Creator vivid, upright, and shining with articulated beauty. So I'm just going to give you one example of their description of one of the major arcana archetypes of the transformation of the spirit, the sarcophagus. You see in this image here a child, a woman, and a man that are essentially being called upwards out of a tomb. And this tomb represents the material illusion that we're being called upwards to. And they said that what you call our sarcophagus in your system may be seen as the material world. This material world is transformed by the spirit into that which is infinite and eternal. And this is what we do with our spirits. We see things differently. We transform our reality from the finite to the infinite in this archetypal nature of being. And the infinity of spirit is an even greater realization than the infinity of consciousness. For consciousness which has been disciplined by will and faith, consciousness which has been disciplined by will and faith is that consciousness which made contact intelligent infinity directly. So the disciplining by will and faith is the spiritual component of consciousness which we can be working on. And we can gain an increase in our transformative ability to tap into changes in consciousness, changes in spirit, when we are disciplined by will and faith. And these are central concepts, they said, to why the tarot is a useful path of study. And it's not even relating to divination. This is just relating to the study of these images and what this means for you. There are many things which fall away, and the many steps of adepthood. We of Ra still walk these steps and praise the one Creator at each transformation. So I'll as I wrap up here, I've got just a few slides left. I'll recommend meditation, of course, for this. They said by far the most generally useful type of meditation is a passive meditation involving the clearing of the mind, the emptying of the mental jumble, which is characteristic of the mind complex activity among your people. So this is by far the most generally useful meditation, is just trying to clear your mind. The understanding, experiencing, accepting, and merging of self with other self, and finally with the Creator, is the path to the heart of self. Merging with other self, and finally with the Creator. In each infinitesimal part of yourself resides the one creator and all of its power. Therefore, we can only encourage these lines of contemplation, always stating the prerequisite of meditation, contemplation, or prayer as a means of subjectively, objectively using or combining various understandings to enhance the seeking process. Without such a method, such as meditation, of reversing the analytical process, one could not integrate into unity the many understandings gained in such seeking. So this is the way that we reverse our analytical mind, is to quiet it down. And visualization is another kind of meditation they talked about. They asked, Don asked, how does the ability to hold visual images in mind allow that adept to do polarization in consciousness without external action? And they said the adept is one which will go beyond the green ray, which signals entry into harvestability. So this is about activating higher chakras for the purpose of transmuting planetary harvestability and consciousness. So this is about affecting the group consciousness without having to do as much work in the physical body. The means of this working lie within. The first key is silence, and secondly, singleness of thought. Number one, silence. Number two, singleness of thought. This is a huge teaching in esoteric mystery schools, is to get down to one thing that you're thinking about. Thusly, a visualization which can be held steady to the inward eye for several minutes. This is a great technique. Just try to imagine one thing for several minutes straight. A visualization which can be held steady to the inward eye for several minutes will signal the adept's increase in singleness of thought. This singleness of thought then can be used by the positive adept to work in the group ritual visualizations for the raising of positive energy, and by negative adepts for the use in increasing personal power. So this is a powerful technique, whether or not you're working with others or trying to work by yourself in the negative sense. But I highly recommend working with others in group meditations, group visualizations for raising positive energy, such as what Caressa was doing with us. And so to wrap up, I want to also recommend my favorite supplement, which I've been taking religiously for 15 years, which brings me to tears quite a lot more than anything else we've ever experienced. This is also called the herb of enlightenment. Gotu kola is an herb in India that's been used for thousands of years and was called Brahmi in northern India, which relates to the goddess who is the source of the power of Brahma, the creator. And I recommend taking 2.5 grams of this herb before any kind of spiritual work that you're doing, which would be 5 capsules of 500 milligrams of the whole herb. I don't recommend the extract or making the whole herb. I think this opens up a lot of things in the mind that on a very subtle level, it's not like it's mind altering. It's just opening up a little bit more potential in the mind. You can even grow it and eat it with your salads. A lot of people eat it on salads. So I recommend that herb, and I recommend this book called Miracle of Love by Ram Dass. If you don't know this man named Kurli Baba, he is one of the most amazing humans, I think, of the modern era. This book is a summary of over 2,000 stories. This is a book full of stories about this guy who was trying to fly under the radar. His life was constant miracles, constant healing and helping other people, and not trying to become famous. He was trying not to become famous. So not many people even know about him, even though Ram Dass was trying to spread his message. Ram Dass was a very undistorted teacher. So that's why I think Maharaji named Kurli Baba trusted Ram Dass to be one of the people who brought his information out to the West. And this book shows how the miracles of Jesus in the New Testament could be easily, vastly more commonplace if we accepted some of these core teachings of love and forgiveness, and we're much more disciplined to pursue this. And this book also, but just by reading it, you may have a visitation from this guru. And so I started a presentation or a podcast full of these kinds of presentations called Law of One Deep Dives with my friends Nathan, Andrew, Nick. Nick is around somewhere, I think. And you can visit essentialworks.tv/law of one. And also, if you want to start your own podcast or share your podcast in an automated way, if you've already started a podcast, you can integrate it with a social platform and it'll automatically post your information into the feed every time you post a podcast episode. So I'll conclude with one of the ways in which Ra concluded in their session 104 closing statement. They said, "We leave you in appreciation of the circumstances of the great illusion in which you now choose to play the pipe and timbrel and move in rhythm. We are also players upon the stage. The stage changes, the acts ring down, the lights come up once again, and throughout the grand illusion and the following, there is the undergirding majesty of the one infinite creator. All is well, nothing is lost. Go forth rejoicing in the love and the light, the peace and the power of the one infinite creator. I am Ra Adonai." That's it.